Greece, a country where laid back is the law of the people. Great food, idyllic weather and scenery at every turn. This relaxing lifestyle is what brings in the tourists, but for the locals, the reality is very different. A country in chaos, Greece is in the middle of a meltdown. A corrupt government, rising debt, and regular protests is the picture painted in Greece today.
3 years ago, Greece was going through a period of financial recovery and booming because of the Olympic Games and the aftermath of the Olympic Games. There was a lot of money, there was an affluent society, a society full of sort of cheap foreign labor as well. And now within the last 2 years, essentially not even 24 months, the whole system has collapsed, has imploded. There's no, you can see there's no money, there's no liquidity in the market. Actually, market for the middle class does not really exist. And you see that the atmosphere itself is full of, if I may say, anger, frustration, rage.
Vrasitis Karalis is a professor of modern Greek at the University of Sydney. He believes the downfall of Greece is a sign of times to come for the rest of the world.
The EU, if I may say, in my opinion, is you cannot have the European Union without Greece. Because Greece is, if I may say, the birthplace of secular democracy. So if you had the European Union without Athens, you have a motherless culture. Okay. Because the European Union is not simply a union of economics, of economies. It's a cultural union, it's a political union, it's a social union. So you have to see the Europe as a project, ongoing project, which is not defined simply by economics, but politics, society and culture.
There is a lot of debate about the root cause of Greece's current chaos. But for the people on the street, what really matters the most is finding a solution, and soon.
So this is what we have here in Europe. We have a monetary design that is unraveling. And the problem is that if you are caught in that monetary design while it's unraveling, effectively you sink, and you sink without a trace.
Yanis Varoufakis is a professor of economics at the University of Athens. He believes the end of the European Union is inevitable.
Europe is a very rich continent. It has deep enough pockets to finance this slow tragedy and to delay the inevitable for quite a long while. How long do we have before we stop it from being the inevitable outcome? That is another question, and my suspicion is that the answer is not very long.
Okay.
We'll be talking about weeks.
Yeah, well, they're definitely not making themselves the beacon of stability here. But do you think that, as a result, any other European states are starting to get a little scared? I mean, Greece isn't the only country that has a massive debt problem right now. So do other countries now assume that if they take strict austerity measures, then, well, the exact same thing is going to break out, violence and protests?
Yeah, you have to figure that the leaders in countries like Portugal and Spain are pretty nervous right now, sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. They obviously don't want to see a Greece-like riot situation break out. On the other hand, the debt markets are rapidly losing confidence in their ability to repay their loans. So they're really stuck. There is no good answer that's obvious on the horizon.
These are not the sort of images a failing country that depends on the tourist trade wants the world to see. But this is what the center of Athens looked like again today. Raging battles flowing back and forth through the capital's main square, as the Greek parliament voted to cut back public spending by another $40 billion, raise taxes, and sell off about $70 billion in state-owned companies. And the bigger worry here is that a collapse will trigger another economic earthquake with shocks felt around the world.
Germany is lowering expectations of a breakthrough in the Eurozone's sovereign debt crisis at next weekend's summit of European Union leaders. Financial markets had risen last week on hopes that the 27 EU heads would agree on a comprehensive solution, but German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble has said while European governments will adopt a 5-point plan to address the turmoil, it's wrong to expect a miracle cure from the summit. Schäuble said we need a long-term solution for Greece, or at least a solution of which we can say that it could work over a longer period of time. And for that, Greece cannot avoid a reduction of its debt.
We made some huge errors in the past, one of them being to accept the bailout loans, which were huge at high interest rates and came with string attached, that also called austerity, that effectively shrunk the GDP, the national income of Greece, from which these huge loans would have to be repaid. So that was a big mistake. Now that we find ourselves here, where we, in the mire in which we are at present, our only chance. The only thing we can do is do what we should have done 2 years ago. The effect will not be as positive, but nevertheless we still have to say no to more bailouts and to more austerity, and to put it to our European partners that this vicious cycle has to cease, it has to be broken, and that since we are at the most painful part of the cycle, we have the right to say no.
The main thread of political democracy, which is trust amongst society and the state, has been severed and does not exist anymore. So it is a serious issue, I think, of the which proves the failure of the political establishment of the country, that failed to modernize economic functions, failed to modernize society, and created an artificial divide between the state and the social structures. And what you see, the instability exists because of the constant conflict between those two. Because if you meet the Greeks, especially if you go outside the urban centers where the state is very influence very obvious, you will see that you're dealing with people who are entrepreneurial, very clever, extremely, I would say, savvy in the ways of the world.
Greece could soon be forced into bankruptcy or leave the Eurozone, raising European banking shares and broader financial markets affected by concerns of a Greek meltdown.
There is a very beautiful Greek proverb: the fish stinks from its head. The stench of a fish comes from its head. That is to say
Say it for me again.
The fish stinks from its head. That is the head, and then the whole body stinks because it corrupts. It's corrupted. Corruption comes from from the government, that is to say. I think what happens in Greece is that, and that it was revealed that 1,000 Greeks have brought out of the country 600 billion euros in Swiss accounts. The Greek government knew about that since the beginning of 2000. They did nothing. The 10% of this in taxation would have solved the problem of Greece for the next 50 years, as you understand. 10% per year, right? That is to say, 60 billion. it's substantial. But nobody touched these people. So I don't think that when a poor farmer in a remote island does not pay 300 euros for his taxes, is the real tax evasion, right? When you see that the original budget for the Olympic Games of 2004 in Athens was around 50 billion euros and quadruple up to 250 billion euros, you have to think that at a certain stage you have to pay the bill, and somebody has to pay the bill. And 200 million euros more than the original budget, as you understand, is a serious problem, which led the government actually to start heavily borrowing. And borrowing so much that they didn't have money at the end after 2008, if I may explain what happens now. After 2008, they didn't have any means of giving back the money that they have borrowed when the financial system collapsed in 2008. So the whole problem became obvious.
Greece has a large number of homegrown malignancies, with tax evasion, with the state sector that was very cozily linked to the private sector in a quite corrupt way, an economy which never really recovered from the 1970s crisis and the collapse of whatever heavy industry we had in this country. It was an economy that had moved very far and very fast from production to services. So Greece was always teetering on the verge of the crisis in the last 20, 30 years. But the reason why you and I are talking about Greece now is not that. The reason why you and I are talking about this and why Greece is making headlines is because of the Eurozone. Because in 1999, 2000, a number of European countries decided to join monetarily their economies together by means of a common currency, but without having shock absorbers and various institutions beyond monetary institutions that would ensure that the large aggregate economy that was being created through this currency union could survive a major financial global crisis.
The Greek political system, and that's the other thing, is you see this, because it's not, I call it in an article I published, an autocratic democracy. Whoever votes for the party which is in power gets certain perks and certain privileges.
What sort of privileges?
You can do whatever you want. You can build without paying taxes, without being exempted from all kind of bureaucratic problems and pressures that you have. So what happens in Greece? We have this clientelistic democracy. If the party you have voted, which you voted for, is in power, you can have everything you want, and nobody will persecute you or prosecute you, because of the absence of checks and balances that we see there. So, obviously, this crisis, I see this crisis, if I may speak with a platitude, as an opportunity. Because these practices have become really obvious. And will be the best opportunity now to completely, wipe out all these clientelistic policies and create a modern, contemporary, functional democracy.